You are listening to the Nature's Premier Podcast, episode 57, a look into zoos and why I personally don't patron them. Here on the Nature's Premier Podcast, we talk about everything from bees to babies and sustainable living. Join us while we talk about natural parenting and different ways to live a more sustainable lifestyle for ourselves and our future generations to come. Now let's begin. Hello. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nature's Premier Podcast. I am your host, Brooke Nichols, and I am so grateful to be here with you all today. Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode. I did miss an upload last week. I do apologize, you guys. It has been so crazy with, school being out, with the business, and everything in between. For those of you who can appreciate, who have kids who are also running around like crazy, you'll know where I'm coming from. But thank you all so much for your patronage, and thank you guys so much again for tuning in to another episode. Now, as always, without our sponsor, Nature's Premier Diaper Service, we would not be doing this podcast. They help to fund the podcast, pay for different fees associated with the podcast. So please do check us out at www.naturespremier.com if you are looking to reduce your eco footprint. Nature's Premier is a cloth and compostable diaper service, providing families throughout Long Island and New York City with a healthier way to diaper their babies. Again, check them out at www.naturespremier.com to learn more. Now on to the show. We are in the throes of zoo season. Yes, it is August. It is summer, a hot summer for that matter, on Long Island, New York, and in New York, and all around. It is just hot everywhere, you guys. But it is definitely zoo season. Lots of people posted pictures with, baby giraffes and different baby animals. And it always brings up the old topic of, zoos and just the humanity behind them. Now, this is kind of a controversial topic. It's definitely a divided topic among animal rights activists and among humanitarians and those who are involved in like zoology and the like, and this is all based on my opinion. This is not judging anybody, but I do have a lot of bones to pick with zoos. Personally, I don't patron zoos. I don't bring my children to go to zoos, and I pretty much taught them it's a prison for animals. I mean, to be completely honest, you guys know I'm transparent to a fault. That's my personal belief on zoos. Even with like when the Ringling Brothers were around, we would go to zoo protests. My kids were like in baby carriers when they were going, they saw other children there and, they just, Ringling, the saddest show on earth. I mean, we had all of that, right? Like, using animals for monetary gain, putting them in poor environments, whipping them, making them do tricks that they would never do in their natural environment. No one tight ropes, in the Amazon rainforest. It's just not a thing. There's not like balls to juggle, you know what I'm saying? Like maybe bananas, but I digress. So I have a lot of issues with circuses, and that's a whole other topic. But and that front has been attacked heavily, and we've seen a huge progression into more of like Circus de Olay shows, which are absolutely amazing, and it really shows you how far the human talent can go. So we've definitely peeled back or pulled the reins, so to speak, no pun intended, on using animals in circuses. But what we haven't done enough of is zoos, SeaWorld, who I absolutely detest. But that is an entire episode. I promise you that will be coming, and I will dedicate like an hour about SeaWorld, about all of the drama, all of the issues with SeaWorld. But I wanted to talk about zoos again because, a lot of people know Blackfish. They've seen the documentary on Netflix. If you haven't, I definitely recommend checking it out. I personally can't watch the whole thing. I'm just like a waterfall. I can't. I cry. I'm just way too empathetic towards these animals. But what I will say is it's definitely a must watch. But zoos, for some reason, don't get the same publicity. They don't get the same coverage as, an aquarium like SeaWorld would, right? You don't see the protest as much, unless like a national like tragedy happens, like with Harambe, which is like a sore spot for me. Just a sad situation all around, sad for the family, sad for the animal who lost its life, but who profited it? They filled that place real quick with another gorilla, so they don't care, right? The zoos don't care. They want to make money. That's my personal interpretation of the situation, and 9 times out of 10, I'm right. Now, I will say this before I start talking about zoos, are that there are very few zoos in my personal opinion, that take the animal welfare into consideration. Before I was doing this episode on zoos, I did come across a couple like San Diego Zoo. There are some zoos that really want to make the habitat for the animal more natural. But again, you have to understand that, like it's a business, you know what I mean? So like if they don't need the animal, they're going to kill it. They're going to sell it. They're going to do whatever they have to do to make sure that they get a more profitable, cuter, more, display worthy type of animal so they can bring in that revenue. Zoos are businesses. Zoos are not sanctuaries, which are usually nonprofits, which run off of donations, which take in animals that, have been abandoned, animals that were abused, possibly some animals that are from zoos. Like we see it all the time. We see it constantly with more sanctuaries opening up. Lots of sanctuaries are needed. So before I start with this, I will say that if you want to see animals, take your children to see an animal, because kids love animals. I mean, they don't need to know the politics behind it, right? They just want to see a giraffe. They just want to see an elephant. Take them to a sanctuary. And I highly recommend finding a sanctuary in your area. Sometimes you may have to drive a little bit, but usually if you live in like a suburban or, a city type of, I guess, area, right? Can't talk today. But if you live in like that kind of setup, then, you're going to find somewhere that is going to be either an ecology center, a preserve, or like I said, if you have to travel a little bit, find a sanctuary. Now, not all sanctuaries are created equally. Of course, there are some more sketchy type of, just mass profiting sanctuaries, unfortunately, but the majority, I'd say probably 95% of them, are definitely going to be benefiting the animals. There are some amazing ones in New York. We have the Catskill Animal Sanctuary. We have the Woodstock Animal Sanctuary. There's just a bunch of different sanctuaries to definitely check out. So with that said, I wanted to jump into some of the problems and some of the issues that I personally have with zoos. And then in other episodes, we'll highlight stories like with the Harambe, with the giraffe, if you guys remember. It was absolutely heartbreaking, national news, but it happens all the time. It's just very selected which animals they actually want to showcase and show you what is actually happening behind the scenes. Now, one of the biggest problems that I have with zoos are the way that these animals are housed, or their habitats are created, rather. A lot of people don't realize that animals that are kept in captivity often makes them go completely insane. In the wild, elephants walk up to 30 miles each day. Bears are active for up to 18 hours a day, exploring their home ranges for up to hundreds of miles. And tigers and lions love running and climbing and will roam many miles to hunt. But when these animals, or any wild animal for that matter, are imprisoned in cages or small enclosures at zoos, they don't get to do the things that are natural and important to them. Instead, animals in zoos are kept in cramped spaces with virtually no privacy and have very few opportunities to exercise or keep their minds active. Living without these important things often causes zoochosis, a condition in which animals act strangely and even hurt themselves out of boredom and frustration. Now, I will just say that one thing that stuck with me was when I was a kid, and, there was like those pop-up tent circuses, and I'll always remember this to the day I die. It bothers me to this day. I was probably about like maybe 8 or 9 years old, and I was like hustling money to get money up to see this animal that I wanted to see. And it was like a rare red striped tiger, whatever. I don't even think that was a real thing. I think they probably spray painted him or whatever. And it was 50 cents. It sounds funny. It was 50 cents I needed. Now, again, I grew up very poor, rich in morals and family, but very poor monetarily or monetary wise. I'm telling you guys, I cannot talk today. I'm sorry. But I will say, so it was like $1 or 50 cents or $1, something like that. And I was doing chores around the house, and I got this money, and I went to the zoo, or I went to the circus with my family, and I paid to go see this rare tiger. And being an empath or being empathetic since I was a little girl, like very young, 3, 4 years old, stop eating meat, just being very in tune with animals, it like haunts me to this day to think of how tortured this tiger was. I go in this little area, it was behind a sheet. This tiger could barely move, you guys, like barely walk in a circle. And I remember just seeing this tiger pace and pace and pace, and I'm looking at it and I'm just staring at it. And I remember it just had its head down and it looked up at me and then looked right back down again, like so skinny, just pacing and pacing and pacing. honestly broke my heart. I started crying. I was asking what was wrong with this tiger, and they said, "Oh, he's tired. He's been traveling X, Y, and Z." But it always haunted me, and I always wanted to know what the fate of that tiger was. And unfortunately, we know what happens in zoos; they get killed. But I remember, just profiting, all about the profits. It was a cage. It was all metal. There was nothing in this cage for this tiger. They probably had like a zookeeper, periodically go over there and give the tiger water or food or whatnot. But I just remember the misery, the absolute misery. And pacing is a nervous symptom. Pacing is like they're going crazy. And this tiger could barely pace. If it was any bigger, it could not pace. So, and pace, I mean just walk in a circle because it could barely do that. So I remember just seeing that. And anytime I've ever gone to zoos as a kid, I hated going to zoos. I loved animals, but I just felt it. I know like some people would be like, oh, that's like pseudoscience, whatever. But I'm telling you, you feel the energy of other beings. When your spouse or when your kids are upset, you get that feeling. I'm telling you, you can feel it with animals. Like you don't let your dog out. Your dog wants to come on a trip with you. You can tell the dog's upset. Like there's just ways that humans connect with animals. And anytime I ever go to a zoo, which hasn't been in many, many, many years, I feel the misery. Same thing if I go to a pound. One time I went to go adopt a dog at a pound, and you just feel it. You just feel these animals are so sad, like scared, sad, nervous, don't know their fate. I mean, that's how zoos are because they're not home. They're put into tiny little cages. They're not given even the basic amenities for an animal like that. These are exotic animals. They see exotic, veterinarians because they're exotic. They are not supposed to be in a cage. Same thing with like people who have wildlife at their homes. There's more tigers in people's houses than there are in the world. I mean, it's crazy. Now, I will say, to be devil's advocate, some people will say, oh, well, that's why we need zoos, because we need the breeding programs. But we can support sanctuaries. There are tiger sanctuaries. There are elephant sanctuaries. We can support sanctuaries over zoos where it's all about profit. It's all about turning out the cutest animal. It's all about, keeping their costs down, which means the animals are impacted. It's always the animals that get affected. It's never the company or the zoo that's making the money. They're there to make money, and they're there to exploit the animals for it. And that segues into number 2. Zoos only care about one thing. And this is, controversial, but it's not the animals. They only care about one thing. People love seeing baby animals at the zoos, and a lot of zoos breed animals to make more babies because babies are big sellers. People love seeing baby monkeys. They love seeing baby zebras. They absolutely love baby animals. If you don't believe me, just look at during spring. They always have these different farms. They're like, hey, look at the baby goats. Look at the baby pigs. Kids love babies. Adults love baby animals. Everybody loves baby animals. And as a result, that causes a lot of overpopulation. And it also causes a lot of money. Lots of money for these zoos. When babies grow up, though, they aren't as popular. And the zoos often trade, loan, or sell animals who aren't making them as much money as when they were younger. I mean, can you even imagine someone getting rid of you because you're not a baby anymore? I mean, we would have been gone 2 decades ago. You know what I mean? It's just wild to think about it. And, unfortunately, the overpopulation is a very, very serious issue in zoos. Segue back to that giraffe that was killed. If there's not enough room, they're going to kill an animal. If they can't. And what bothers me, too, is that, there's a lot of times sanctuaries will step in and be like, hey, we'll take that animal. We will take it off your hands. They're like, no, zoo property, and they'll put 2 bullets in its head. I mean, come on, have some kind of compassion. Have some kind of humanity. It's already been proven that animals are sentient beings. They have a central nervous system. They feel pain. They feel emotions. They feel love. There's no reason to snipe out a baby giraffe because you don't have any room for it, or if you have too many babies, it's just crazy, you guys. I can go on a total rant there. But that's another one. So we have the fact that captivity makes animals crazy 9 times out of 10, usually 10 times out of 10. Just some animals don't display the insane symptoms as much as others. Second one is that zoos care about one thing the most, and it's not the animals. And that is the moolah that they make from the animals, exploiting them. They make lots and lots and lots and lots of money. Multi-million-dollar industry, billion-dollar industry, whatever have you. They make a lot of money. Trust me, and they're not going away unless people hit them in the pocket, because that's the only way that these companies have a heartbeat. That's literally their heartbeat, is their wallet. Third one is that zoos just aren't educational. Possibly the biggest lie that zoos tell people is that by visiting them, people will learn about the animals. But the only thing that zoos teach people is that it's okay to keep animals in captivity, bored, cramped, lonely, and very far from home. This is a big problem with, in my personal opinion, people taking their children to zoos. Now, again, I'm not mommy shaming. I'm not doing any of that. I'm extremely liberal in my views and how people raise their children. It is completely up to them. But I will say, just to open your mind a little bit, that if you're showing children that it's okay to have animals in a zoo, you're showing them that it's okay to, profit off of them. It's okay. It's animal abuse. It's animal abuse. Even if they're not, beating them in front of you, they're putting them into submission. They're not feeding them an adequate diet. Oftentimes, they're usually underweight. They're not in a good environment, and they're very, very lonely, and they're very unhappy. They're just extremely unhappy. Even if they're paired with another mate, it's prison. It's absolutely prison. And by taking your children there, you think that you're learning something. Oh, the elephants, elephants travel hundreds of miles a day. Oh my goodness, that's a fact, right? But you can learn that in a Google search. You can learn that from National Geographic. You don't have to go to these places and see a miserable elephant. If you want to see elephants in their habitat, fly to India. Go to these huge elephant sanctuaries that they have there. Now, again, some of them are for profit. A lot of them are sanctuaries. A lot of them don't make a dime. A lot of them just make enough to run, and that's it. And any donations that they make, it goes to the family for them to live. This is what we have to do right now to take a stance and to show our children, to show the next generation that we will not tolerate, animal exploitation in any form. And zoos are probably the biggest, aside from the big ag. I'm not talking about little farms. I'm talking about big ag that has animals, locked in slaughterhouses, never seeing the light of day. Zoos are a very close second. So zoos are not educational in my personal opinion. Open a book, or visit the animal in its natural habitat. I'm telling you, you'll see elephants do things that you'll never see them do in a zoo. You'll see them jump, you'll see them be happy, be with their family, just see a different elephant than you would at a zoo. Essentially, you have to think of it like this. Every time you go to a zoo, it's almost like you're just on the roster to visit an inmate in prison, because that's literally what zoos are. They are prisons, and you should see how a lot of these zoos get their animals. It's absolutely heartbreaking. It's a lot of it's breeding, but you should see if they need a tiger, okay, we're going out there, the way they trap them, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. And even the people that they work to contract to get these animals, the way that travel, the way that they're just in so much stress. I mean, there's a lot to learn about it. But again, I'm not going to get in the weeds. I promise. I'm just very passionate about animal rights. Now, another issue that I have, number 4, is that zoos really rarely help animals. I mean, again, unless it's a sanctuary, unless it's doing a catch and release program like the Holtzville Animal Ecology Center, I believe it's somewhere in Long Island. It's Holbrook, I think, or Holtzville. And it's they have a lot of animals that they have rehabilitated. It's like a rehabilitation center. Now, that area is very small for these animals, but again, these animals would be dead if it wasn't there, because they are literally rehabilitating them. They wouldn't be able to live in the wild. Those centers, taking your kids to those, you're patroning something good. You're patroning rehabilitation, a catch and release. But, zoos, they don't help animals. They rarely help animals. Many zoos claim that the reason why they exist and continue to breed animals is to help protect endangered species, but that's just not true. In fact, most animals in zoos aren't even endangered, and those who are will likely never be released into natural habitats. And any breeding program that these zoos have in place, again, you have to understand, they can't just breed all these animals. They can't just breed, 10 different, lemurs. I don't know I think that's what they're called, lemurs. They can't just breed monkeys. They can't just breed tigers. They have to have an action plan in place. If they have too many animals, they're going to kill some. That's just what it is, and people hate hearing that, but it's true. If you're paying to go to the zoo, you're paying for these animals to get euthanized. You're paying for their misery. It's just what it is. And there's extreme overpopulations with certain, different animal sects, and we're not even going to jump into Disney and what they do with their whole animal zoos and how inhumane it is over there. I mean, but they have, they keep a lot of their animals underground, and then they bring them up. I mean, it's crazy, you guys. It's so crazy. But any breeding program they have in place, they're breeding it for the sole benefit of that zoo. They're breeding them for a profit. They're not breeding them in the good of their heart to put it back into the dying population in the wild. That's not what they're doing. And if they are doing it, that's highly suspect, or that's what their business is. They're a rehabilitation center or they're some kind of sanctuary, but they're not a zoo because zoos want to make money. They're not going to let a $5,000 tiger run into the wild without profiting off of that. So that's something to take into consideration. Zoos just do not help animals. I know zoologists will come for me, but I will say that they don't help animals, in my personal opinion. With the studies at hand, the breeding programs, again, are just, breeding tools for the zoo to make more money. Another thing is that zoos are just dangerous for animals. They just are, especially if they're understaffed, they're underfunded, because again, they want to worry about that bottom line, want to make sure they're making some kind of profit. When you really think about it, zoos, again, like I said, are basically just prisons that leave animals with no ways to defend themselves or escape dangerous situations. Animals in zoos all over the US have been poisoned, have been starved, have even been denied basic veterinary care because, again, they're worried about that bottom line. And zoos definitely undercut when it comes to veterinary care. Not all of them, but a lot of them, more that are, that are going to omit that. And they've even been burned in fires, these animals. Other animals have died after eating trash that was thrown into their cages, and some animals have even been beaten or killed by people who stole them from their pens. They're not safe. It's just really, really sad. Even if they have security guards and stuff like that, what about at night? I don't know. It's very, very sketch. During natural disasters like floods, wildfires, and hurricanes, animals in zoos are often left without any help or ways to escape. So, for example, after Hurricane Katrina, most of the 10,000 aquatic animals at Audubon Aquarium of the Americas in New Orleans died after the power failed and employees were forced to leave. You hear about this a lot, like major areas that are forced to evacuate. I think there was one in Russia. I may be mistaken about the location, but there was something called a ghost zoo where there was some kind of natural disaster and these animals were left to die pretty much. And you see people that are trying to get them food and they're trying to make it to that area. And it's just really, really sad, you guys, because nobody ever thinks of the animals. I mean, it happens time and time again. Everyone always forgets. These zoos are, not only are they there to make money, make the animals miserable, but then when something happens, there's no safety nets in place to protect them. So they're used, abused, and then they die a horrible death. It's just very, very, very sad. What most people don't realize too is that animals die prematurely in zoos. Some people think that because they're in a zoo that they're protected, but like we just mentioned, it's a dangerous place for animals. At least if they're out in the wild, they're free, they're roaming. If they die in a fight, they die, as prey to a predator. I mean, those things happen. It's a circle of life. But animals do die prematurely in zoos. African elephants in the wild live more than 3 times as long as those kept in zoos. Even Asian elephants working in timber camps live longer than those born in zoos. 40% of lion cubs die before 1 month of age. In the wild, only 30% of cubs are thought to die before they are 6 months old, and at least a third of those deaths are due to factors which are absent in zoos, like predation. Now, I do just want to segue real quick because we're going down the facts, and I forgot to add this one, but there was actually a study done by a Freedom for Animals organization. They are freedomforanimals.org.uk. And it found that at least 7,500 animals, and possibly as many as 200,000 in European zoos, are surplus at any time. Animals are regularly culled in UK zoos. In a 2009 study, the whole pack of wolves at Highland Wildlife Park were killed after the social structure of the pack had broken down. In 2010, 2 wolf cubs and an adult female were shot dead at Dartmoor Wildlife Park. The vet reported selective cull due to overcrowding and fighting in the pack, and further cull of cubs needed. In 2001, a DEFRA zoo inspection at Dartmoor Wildlife Park, there's a lot of names, in October 2001 found that several significant dead animals were stored in a food freezer for taxidermy in the future. The European Association of Zoos and Aquaria said in 2009 that member zoos were being actively encouraged to kill unwanted animals, including tigers, if other zoos did not want them and if they were hybrids. It said that such animals take up space and keeper time. In 2012, a zoo trade bodies rallied to the defense of a German zoo which was prosecuted for breaching animal welfare laws after it killed 3 tiger cubs because they were not pure-blooded. Again, that's the whole hybrid thing. I mean, the whole breeding thing. They want the best. They want pure blood. A big, big, big problem in that. In 2011, an expose at Knowsley Safari Park led by Freedom for Animals, following information provided by a whistleblower, showed that the safari park to be in a contravention of legislation on disposal of carcasses, as well as raising queries over handling of firearms. A former employee of Safari Park alleged culling was being used as a means of training instead of being carried out in the kindest and most humane way possible. Now, and of course, just to end it on a very, very, very famous issue that I mentioned earlier with the baby giraffe, in early 2014, there was a global outrage when Copenhagen Zoo killed a healthy young giraffe called Marius. The event triggered a worldwide debate on culling in zoos, and it was admitted by zoo spokespeople that thousands of healthy animals are deliberately killed in European and American zoos alone each year. So pretty much, if you're supporting these zoos in any capacity, you are supporting the killing of baby animals. As dramatic as that sounds, and I'm not trying to insult anybody, these are the issues at hand. Again, I'm not saying you're a bad person if you like going to zoos and you like, taking your kids to them, but I just want you to understand that, these are the issues that are happening. These animals are being profited off of. They're living in extremely tight spaces. They're not getting, adequate care. And they might be getting the best vet care. Let's say they're spending thousands of dollars a year on care for these animals. It doesn't mean that they're getting, the emotional care they need. You can treat somebody fantastic, but if you keep them in a cage, they're going to be miserable. Doesn't matter what you do. These animals belong in the wildlife. These animals belong with their families. And unfortunately, we do have issues with poaching. It's a huge problem. We do have issues with, hunting. And it's a big, big, big problem for these animals. But I will say that there are many sanctuaries. There are many organizations that care about the well-being of these animals. There are protected areas for a lot of these animals, like tigers and lions, even though it doesn't stop people, like the whole, Cecil situation. That's a whole different story. But I will say, though, that you have to be very diligent and very mindful of how you spend your dollar. We always say it on the podcast that $1 is a vote. And this is no difference. I mean, if you're patroning zoos, you're paying for them to have these, elite breeding programs and culling these animals and having them in prison and, having these animals to be at a high risk for disease, high risk for, shortening their life expectancy. I mean, these are very, very severe issues. And just as a compassionate person, regardless of my diet, regardless of my stance on a lot of these issues, I mean, just as someone that has empathy towards animals, I will say, that is why I take a very firm stance against zoos. So I hope today was helpful for you. I really touched the surface on a bunch of reasons, issues that I have with zoos. But I do hope today was a good, kind of like an intro to zoos. We will be having more episodes on it. And I'm actually going to be highlighting different stories about sentient beings. I really want to highlight more on the show about compassion, ethics, just empathy for animals, for our fellow humans, talk about different people, talk about different animals. And I am going to kind of have a show highlight on that. But as far as the zoos go, this is, again, just a brush on zoos, a quick refresher if you haven't known about the issues that are surrounding zoos. Please do share this episode with your friends that may not know about it. What I mentioned were facts. These are stats. Some of it may not apply to every zoo. I'm not saying that it does. It does apply to a lot of zoos, though, and it is a business, and it's just an industry that we have to really, hold accountable for their ethics. I would have no problems with zoos making money if, tigers had 50 acres to roam. I'm being serious. I mean, I really wouldn't. And that's where the San Diego Zoo comes in. A lot of people want to defend the San Diego Zoo. I read a lot about it online, about their habitats, and I praise zoos that do that. If you're in business, at least do it right, okay? At least don't do a BS breeding program. Take in the animals that need housing, and if you want to make money off of them, that's your prerogative. But don't have them miserable. But you need a lot of land, lots of millions and millions of dollars, and people don't want to spend that. So anyway, if you can, just please share this episode. It really does help get the message out to those people who, may second guess about taking their kids to zoos, which may have a trickle effect to the next generation to show these companies that we won't tolerate animal abuse. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode, and until next week, I hope you have a wonderful, stress-free week ahead. Take care, friends.